Today, we're going to talk about how your company culture is affecting your employees' mental health and well-being. Workplace culture can be more important than your benefits package when it comes to employee engagement and retention, but it's harder to pull off in today's hybrid environments. For ideas on striking a balance between flexibility and connectedness that employees so crave, we've called in Amy Gindin, Chief Marketing Officer at LifeSpeak Inc. Amy Gindin is the Chief Marketing Officer at LifeSpeak Inc., a whole-person well-being solution for employers, health plans, and other organizations. LifeSpeak provides a flexible portfolio of solutions across mental health, wellness, fitness, nutrition, substance abuse, and caregiving. Amy is also a trained mental health professional with a master's in counseling psychology from Chatham University. She has been featured in USA Today, Stat News, Employee Benefits News, HR Daily Advisor, and other business publications. Amy, welcome to Voices of HR.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this is such an important conversation, and I'm so excited that we have you here today because mental health is such an important topic and one that organizations really just can no longer ignore today. And your organization conducted and conducts proprietary research that really takes a hard look at how employees thought they were supported with an employee mental health and well-being versus how employers thought that they were supporting the employees' mental health and well-being. So can you start off by telling us a little bit about the research and what trends you're seeing over time? Are we getting better at it?
Absolutely. So the premise of the study was we surveyed 1,000 employers and 1,000 employees across industries in the U.S. to ask them specifically about how they felt they were being supported or how they felt they were supporting mental health and well-being. And the first year we did this was in 2021, so heart of the COVID pandemic. And what we found is that employers, which were mostly HR professionals and also C-level executives, gave themselves a C on a grading scale in terms of how they were able to support their employees. But employees, when asked the same questions, actually graded their employer at an F, so completely failing. And we were really troubled by this because there's clearly very much a disconnection between the employer's perceived value and the employee's actual value that they're getting. And so what we did was we took another look at the end of 2022 and we asked the same questions. And we found somewhat better results, but not great. So employers still gave themselves an average grade of about a C, but employees gave their employers a D. So they're improving overall, but they're really not honor roll students by any means.
So that is a huge disparity.
Yes.
If employers think that they're doing well or average, and the employees are saying, no, you're not. Actually, I mean, I guess we're improving a little bit because of, I suspect, the hyper focus on it. What did you see as the primary difference between the two? What was it? Expectations? Was it actual delivery? Was there one thing that you could point back to?
For sure. So in our 2022 survey, we tried to dig in a little bit further because we knew there'd probably be a disparity again. And what we found is that employers are often thinking about mental health and well-being as tactical programs and benefits that they can implement. But employees think about mental health and well-being as something a little bit less tangible. It's about culture. It's about psychological safety. It's certainly about programs and benefits, but if an employer isn't walking the walk and they're just talking the talk that's very transparent for employees. And, we had the start of the Great Resignation in 2021, and there is a lot of research outside of our own, even that one of the top drivers of people leaving the workforce during this time period is that they don't feel as though their employer cares about them. And when they don't feel cared about and they don't feel supported, they don't want to be there. And so the takeaway from our research and third-party research is that company culture is everything. And the programs and the benefits that you put in place have to be aligned with the culture, or it's really not nearly as effective.
I am so excited and glad that you made this correlation between mental health and wellness and culture. Because if you listen to the experts, and we've had Dawn Zier, who is the prior Nutrisystem CEO, who was responsible for this huge turnaround and, incredible revenue and incredible profits. And we had an executive recruiter on here, Vivian Kessler. Both of them, and Dr. Renee Booth, who's a psychologist, she was on as well. All of them talked about culture and the importance of culture. But yet what I found in my research as well is that there is this huge disconnect between the aspirations that companies have when they create their values and their expectations of their leaders and what they're actually delivering. So when you look at the biggest difference in the culture of maybe what employers were expecting when they got they graded themselves with a C, and what employees gave them as an F, when you said it's culture, what specifically do you mean? What were the employees looking for besides caring that they didn't get? Can you give us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think, in my mind, there is this gap between the employer experience and the employee experience. And that gap can be summed up in one word, and it's communication. So there is often the biggest challenge at companies is the communication. There are studies that show that the majority of employees, despite having, open enrollment in the US once per year, have no idea what programs and benefits are in place for them. And communication is so important on so many levels. And if your employees don't know about all these great things that are being put in place for them, then they're never going to use it, and they're never going to, reap the benefits of all this money that you're spending on putting it in place. And so communication has to happen across many different levels. I mean, communication is so important to me. I went into communications for this very reason. And so there's, the corporate level communications, whether it's newsletters or notes from the C-suite. There's educating your managers so that your managers have the right tools and the right words to support employees. There's your intranet. There's your employee resource groups. There are so many avenues to communicate. And one of the things that I've learned as a professional communications person is that you actually have to say the same thing at least 13 times before someone actually hears it. And so I think a lot of the mistakes in culture, in company culture, is that leadership puts all these great things in place, and then they send out a one-time email communication and they think it's all fixed. And the reality is that especially in today's day and age, where we are constantly bombarded by notifications and alerts and being pulled in thousands of directions at any given moment, we have to be able to communicate. And I think that plus educating our employees and our managers are really the two big pieces that can take these really well-intentioned leaders with these great programs and turn them into something that's much higher value and more effective for the workforce.
This really is a proof point that companies, and I think you said this in our call before, that they can offer all of the benefits, all the apps, all the mental health benefits. But if the culture isn't aligned, that's where a huge disconnect happens.
Absolutely.
So how do HR pros address this issue? I guess first and foremost, I guess your survey is a good indication just in general, but I suspect some HR pros are sitting there saying, yes, I suspect we would probably get an F or a D as well, but our leadership probably thinks we're doing B or a C. How can HR pros really diagnose whether their culture is suffering? And even if they are offering all these great benefits.
I mean, I can't say enough about employee surveys and giving employees a voice. And whether you're a 100-person company or a 100,000-person company, giving employees the opportunity to speak up and say what's working and what's not is critical in order to improve. And that can be done in so many different ways, but without data and without the voice of the employees, then you're really just aiming in the dark and you don't really know what's working and what's not. I think employee resource groups are a great way to sometimes get anecdotal, quantitative or qualitative information, so that, you can maybe take just a sample size if you don't want to survey absolutely everyone at your organization. But collecting data and getting the voice of the employee is really key in order to making a difference.
And what is I guess for those skeptical C-suites and senior executives, even if the HR pro does come to them with some data and says, listen, I think we have an issue here. And they're stepping back and they're saying, this will pass. It's really just a downstream impact of the pandemic and, everything is so heightened right now, but it'll pass. What would you say? What data, what insight would you give those HR pros that they could then pass along to their executives to make a point that they have to address it now? Because if they don't, what will happen?
Yeah, I mean, the ultimate KPIs for HR are retention, turnover, talent acquisition, and those things are very, very expensive. And we know that when an employee leaves, it's about 1.5 times the cost of an employee's salary in order to recruit and replace them. And you don't need to be an empathetic person to care about the bottom line. And so if you're an HR executive and you're looking at the rate of resignations and turnover and you're getting feedback and exit interviews around why, and it's boiling down to burnout and mental health challenges, that's a wake-up call for the C-suite. That's a business problem. It's not just a human problem at that point.
It is, because what I have seen on social media is that some of these individuals will take to social media and share their experiences at their organizations. And, you do see the impact on Glassdoor and just other sites that evaluate employers.
Absolutely.
As well, which could become a branding issue from a marketing standpoint.
Yeah, a brand reputation issue for sure. I've personally dealt with that on the communication side. You aren't able to delete, for very good reason, negative reviews about your company. And so, the best way to handle that is to not have them in the first place and to support your people.
So let's take the conversation down that path. So let's say the HR pro has identified. Executives say, okay, we believe you. What is their next step? Is it training their managers? Is it more communication to help? Because I see a lot of the managers are kind of in this, they're stuck, right? They're still being asked to create productive teams in a flexible work environment where sometimes their team isn't even in the office, maybe except one day a week, some not at all. And so I also see managers as kind of like the sandwich generation, having to take care of their kids and their parents. Managers have a tough job today.
They do. Managers and HR, I think, have been asked to hold the emotions of employees in a way that they never had to hold before. And it's a tough balance because we aren't asking managers to be therapists, right? We're not asking them to break boundaries and to go beyond the professional relationship. But at the same time, more now than ever before, we recognize that if there's a problem at home, there's a problem at work, and everything is tied together in this very messy ecosystem. And we have to be able to talk about that. And so educating managers about signs of mental health, signs of burnout, signs of stress that might be beyond what's normal, and opening up dialogues with their teams is so important. There's one thing that I do in particular that I love with my team, and that is I start off every meeting where I ask everyone to share what color they are that day. Are they red? Are they yellow? Or are they green? And the great thing about this question is that it gives people an opportunity to share whatever they want. So if they have something really personal going on for them and they, for very good reason, don't want anyone to know the details, they can just say red. I'm having a red day, I'm having a red week, and I need a little bit more support. Or someone who, might be struggling with something, but they are totally comfortable sharing, has the opportunity to go into detail if they want. But it gives the whole team an opportunity to understand where their team is at that day or that week. And for those who are green, or those who are yellow, they can then know that whatever's going on with the rest of my team, I can support those that might be struggling. And so really opening up the opportunity for people to share at whatever level they're comfortable with is such an easy way for managers and leaders to have an open and safe culture within their team without getting into the psychological, clinical components of whatever they're dealing with.
Absolutely. Because, you have a master's degree, right, in this, and I'm sure your conversations are beautiful and they're inspiring and they really can help identify, whether someone's having, a mental challenge or if they're just having a challenging day, right? So for those HR pros out there who are trying to educate their managers to identify and to provide, you used this word before, and I absolutely loved it, a safe space. I love this concept of safe space. Can you describe for our listeners what exactly that is and how managers can provide that, or HR pros can help their managers provide that without kind of going over the line?
Sure. So to me, a safe space or having psychological safety is creating a culture or a space where employees feel as though they can share what they need to share that is boundary appropriate without that negatively impacting their job or their working relationships in any way. So the red, yellow, green metric is one way to do that. Just having regular check-ins with your managers is another way. Having employee resource groups in place that are specific to, very intense or stressful areas of life, whether it's parenting or family caregiving, as an outlet where employees have other individuals within the organization who are opting in and who are sharing their personal challenges is another way to do it as well.
So what happens when you have a manager has someone on their team who they clearly can see that they're having some struggles, but yet that employee is not comfortable talking to them. What would you recommend then?
So most organizations have an employee assistance program in place. And I think that it is totally appropriate for a manager to say, to name a few tangible areas where someone has been struggling professionally without crossing the line and making any personal judgments, and to just remind them about some of the benefits that they have in place. As I said, most organizations have employee assistance programs, but there are often digital benefits as well that are related to mental health and well-being, family support, infertility. There's so much out there that organizations have. And it's very appropriate for a manager or someone in HR to say, hey, have you ever thought about checking out this resource? We have this in place. It's for you to use. It's free. You should check it out if you want to. I mean, certainly you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force them to drink. But again, this comes back to communication. Half the battle is just knowing that there is support out there for the employee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And speaking of support, women in particular really have hit a brick wall post-pandemic. They're tired. Not only were they working two jobs, their day job at work and then at home, but they were at a third job, which was schooling if they had children. And then because activities were canceled, they all of a sudden became the activities manager for their children to keep them, physically motivated and in shape. Are there tools or other support for working families, both men and women? I suspect women took the brunt of this, and I know that's what studies have shown, but men also have taken a hit post-pandemic. What family resources are available for them?
There are lots of resources, and I wish I had known about it years ago, because when I discovered them, I just thought to myself,
do tell. I'd like to know.
So the National Institute of Caregiving is one. The Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregivers is another. They are all nonprofits. They are vendor agnostic. They have resources for caregivers. They have resources for organizations. They've got research that validates a lot of the stress that individuals are going through. They have a huge focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how your race and your socioeconomic status and your ability and your age all plays into a lot of the family stressors that people are dealing with already. I can't say enough about them. We partner with them as well on research, and they're very mission driven, and they're just a great resource for both individuals and organizations.
That's terrific. And we will make a note to put those resource links at the bottom of the page so that individuals have access. I wasn't even aware of those resources. So that's terrific. If we can switch gears to hybrid work environment, and I don't know if this was part of your study as well, and this may be a tough question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway, and then you can certainly take it in whatever direction you want. If a company is allowing hybrid work flexibility to show the organization that they care, that they are listening, that they do understand about work-life balance, that should resonate with millennial and Gen Z workers. I guess probably all workers. But if millennials specifically and Gen Z have a tendency to change job every 2 years or so, if that holds true, do hybrid work schedules still make sense as a strategy for employee retention? And I don't know, there's a lot of questions packed in that, but did your research look into hybrid work environments for that specific generation or all generations?
So we touched upon it a little bit, but I've certainly looked at a lot of third-party research around this as well, out of my own curiosity. And There's a lot to unpack there. I think it's hard to group millennials and Gen Z together because often their life stages are very different. Gen Z is often at the beginning of their career. Their life stage is very much focused on friends and developing new relationships. And there's a number of studies out there that have found that when someone is starting off their career working remotely, they don't advance as quickly because they're not getting the relationships, the mentorship, the support that they need in person. And so it's very challenging when you take someone who is looking to develop adult relationships for the first time in their lives, both professional and personal, and keep them locked up at home 90% of the time. And so I think that Gen Z definitely, I hate to generalize, but across the board, when it makes sense for their lifestyles, I think hybrid works really well. I think millennials can be a little bit tougher. They are starting to creep into the sandwich generation. A lot of them have little kids at home. They are really feeling the intensity of caregiver needs. And they're not at the beginning of their careers. Many of them are directors, VPs, even chiefs, and they don't need as much hand-holding and one-on-one support as Gen Z. My typical philosophy, though, is that one size fits none. And so when we're talking about remote versus hybrid versus fully in person, I don't really like to even segment by generation. I like to take it on an individual or team level as much as possible, just to be as inclusive as possible, because we can't assume that one lifestyle or one working style is going to work for everybody.
So you had said it was also interesting that you had developed a best practice for who should make hybrid work policy decisions. Can you tell our listeners about who that is and why?
Yeah, I believe it should happen at the manager level or the department head level, depending on the size of the organization. And the reason for that is that when you force everyone at an organization to do one model, you may be forcing certain individuals to need to leave because that model doesn't necessarily work for them. And I've seen it on both spectrums. I've had remote jobs where there were employees who really needed the in-person time and they didn't feel like they were getting the support that they needed remotely and they ended up leaving. And then the opposite, where I have employees with elderly parents who have dementia and who are going through a challenging time, and they require being driven around and doctor's appointments and a level of flexibility in working hours that they can't get if they're forced back into the office 3+ days per week. And so I think the conversation, as much as leadership will allow it, should really happen at the individual team level by the manager to say what's going to work for us and the way that we operate versus making a blanket statement for an entire organization. I think you lose talent when you overgeneralize.
Yeah, that's such an excellent point. So one of the struggles of remote and hybrid work is there can be a less sense of connectedness. And connectedness, you talk about, is good for company culture and loyalty to reduce turnover. But you also found that connectedness doesn't just happen in the office, and it can be achieved in much more creative ways. Can you give us some examples of that and maybe some thoughts or inspiration for HR pros on how they could create connectedness in a hybrid environment?
Yeah, I mean, I will say nothing replaces in-person time. I myself work mostly remotely, but I'm planning a big in-person meeting in June for my whole team. And during that meeting, a number of us are traveling to be there. And so we're building in dinners and breakfasts and workshops together that are just, not totally work related as a way to connect when we are in person. But even when you're virtual, I think there are plenty of ways to build connection. One is to build in small talk into your meetings, which feels very forced because when we are two dimensional, we often just want to get right into it. We're overly productive. But I think even dedicating the first 5 to 10 minutes of every meeting just to see how people are doing or how their weekend was is a great way to add connection. We also have different channels in our messaging app at work. There's, one for parents and one for people who are avid hikers and people who love to cook, just so that there are fun ways to connect that aren't work related while we're still focus on the task at hand and at home. We have, joke Mondays and contests. And I think one of the challenges with virtual communication is just that it doesn't leave room for the human element and the relationship. And so, as much as we can think about, okay, if I see a funny video, instead of just texting it to a friend, is there a place that I can send that, assuming it's work appropriate, at work and, make people laugh and make people smile and really bring the humanness back? I think that is really what it comes down to, is creating a virtual environment that sees people not just as employees, but as whole people with lives outside of work and interests and senses of humor and everything that goes along with connection.
And that some of those ideas, the it's almost like resource groups, but based upon topics, hiking and parents, and that probably connects people across the organization that maybe wouldn't have been connected before.
Yeah, there are absolutely advantages of having a national or global workforce, for sure. And one of those ways is being able to get to know people that you normally would never be able to see in person. It's just being mindful and creating those opportunities for people to uncover those personal things about each other. That's key.
So as we're getting ready to wrap up here, was there anything else that came out of your research study that you wanted to share with our audience that would help them better navigate this new environment?
I think the big takeaway on the research for me is just that we can't look at mental health or culture or diversity, equity, and inclusion or belonging in silos. Everything is interconnected and impacts one another. And the most important thing that I would want to get across is that even though in many organizations those programs and those challenges are maybe handled by individuals, those individuals really need to work together to build something holistic. We are complex, multifaceted creatures, and we need the same level of strategy and 30,000 foot view thinking from our organizations.
Mm-hmm. And I love your point too, as well, that address the issues that you have on the table today. Don't sweep them under the rug. They're not going to go away just because they're post-pandemic. Employees want to know that their employers care, and they want to join cultures and companies where they can expect people to behave a certain way. And one of those is bringing my true self to work. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yes. If you don't have a safe space then you'll never have belonging. And if you don't have belonging, then you'll never have great mental health and well-being. And if you don't have great mental health and well-being, you will have challenges with retention and turnover. So it all starts with that very first point.
Excellent point. And all of that impacts your bottom line. So if anybody's questioning whether you should pursue this or whether you should look into this, HR pros, that's why it does affect your bottom line.
100%.
So at the end of every session, we ask our guests to participate in something called rapid fire questions. These are one question sentences that I ask to help our audience get to know you a little bit better. Are you willing to play?
Absolutely. Sounds fun.
All right, let's do this. All right, so who is getting it right today with aligning mental health and culture? Is there a company that comes to mind?
BJ's Wholesale Club does an amazing job of aligning their culture with their mental health. So BJ's Wholesale Club has some amazing programs in place that support mental health, that support culture, that support working parents and caregivers. They have an employee resource group for working parents that is the most active group of all of their groups. They've got hundreds of corporate level employees that chat on a daily basis about their challenges. They have an open letter policy directly to the Chief Human Resource Officer that any of the 30,000 employees can communicate directly with him to share their challenges, what they're facing, and what they would like to see in terms of change. They survey their employees regularly to get data, and they even increased their employee assistance program crisis counseling sessions from 3 to 6 per year after looking at the data and finding that the majority of individuals using that service were maxing out. And so they're really, really in tune with what their employees need, and the communication is there. And I can't say enough great things. They've been a wonderful partner for us.
So that's BJ's Wholesale Club.
Yes.
Terrific. Who are some people or experts that you follow and why?
Well, I'm a little bit obsessed with Adam Grant.
Who doesn't love Adam Grant?
I tried to get him to speak at one of our events, but his price point is a little outside of my budget. And I'm going to leave it at that. I listen to his podcast, Rethinking, weekly. I've burned many calories walking through the woods and listening to Adam Grant. Brene Brown is a classic as well. I've read all of her books. And a new person who has recently made it on my radar is Dr. Becky Kennedy, who is a clinical psychologist, and she focuses on parenting. She's called the Millennial Parenting Whisperer. And she has a community called Good Inside. And it's really all about taking a lot of the stressors in parenting and reframing that into what's really happening to give parents the tools to handle a lot of these sort of everyday challenges. So she's someone who's recently joined my I don't know.
Your list of experts.
My list of experts, yes.
There you go. If you could have a gigantic billboard anywhere with anything on it, metaphorically speaking, getting a message out to millions or billions of people, what would it say and why? And it could be a few words, a paragraph, or a quote.
That's a really good question. I think I would say that humans don't exist in bubbles. And we are products of our environments. And so in order to address the individual needs of mental health and well-being, we have to address the ecosystems in which we live. And that is family and work and community.
Love that. How has failure or apparent failure set you up for success later?
So at our company, we actually encourage each other to fail, which is such a different mentality than anything else I've been used to in my professional years. We call it fast failure. So the idea is if you're not failing, then you're not trying. And it takes a lot of the pressure off of people to get things right the first time. And that failure isn't necessarily a bad thing. We've really reframed it as the journey to get you to where you want to go. And so when I'm trying something new or I'm pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, I try to reframe failure in that way as just trying. And if you're not trying, then you're not living. So I actually really think failure is pretty awesome.
That's great. What is the book or books you've given most as a gift and why?
So I give Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek a lot. I love that book. He signed it. I was fangirling. So just this idea of in order to create a supportive work environment and in order to have a team or a workforce that thrives, it really starts with the leader and their mentality and this idea of leading is service. Leading is not taking. Leading is not power. Leading is not authority. And so I always, and with my own teams, as much as I can, no one's perfect, is just try to think of my role as someone who is in service to others. And if I can build others up, then I'm leading and then I'm succeeding.
Today, we have been joined by Amy Gindin, Chief Marketing Officer of LifeSpeak. Thank you again for joining me, Amy. It has been such a pleasure.
It's been wonderful being here. Thank you for having me.
I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Thanks so much for watching. We would love it if you shared your thoughts on any of the topics we discussed in the comments below. And if you got value from the video, it would mean the world to us if you hit the like button and subscribe to the HR Morning channel. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Voices of HR.